Hey, today on Animal Quest's 7 people who ended up inside a bear's world without ever meaning to go there, and not one of them came back out. From a man in the Yukon who saw ravens turning over the willows and walked in to see what they had found, to a woman in Greenland who stepped outside into the dark for a walk of about 2 minutes. But first, 4 men on Kodiak Island who hung a fresh deer a short way from their tents and went to sleep. The night of October 12th, 2017 was cold and wet on Kodiak Island in Alaska, where the brown bears grow bigger than anywhere else on Earth. A spike camp sat on a gravel bench above a salmon river, 3 small tents and a tarp strung between the alders, flown in 4 days earlier and not due to be picked up for another 3. 4 men were asleep in it, a guide and the 3 hunters who had paid him to put them on blacktail deer. 60 feet from the tents, hanging from a pole they had cut and lashed between 2 trees, were the quarters of a buck they had packed in that afternoon. Emmett Rusk was 54 years old and had been guiding hunters on that island for more than 20 years without anything going badly wrong. Dale Whitcomb was 46 and had hunted with him twice before and trusted him completely. Curtis Vane was 39 and was on the island for the first time and had been talking about the trip for a year. Bo Landry was 58, the oldest of the hunters, and the one who had pushed hardest to stay out on the river another 3 days instead of flying back to town with a full cooler. There are around 3,500 brown bears on the Kodiak archipelago, in an island group you could drive across in an afternoon, if there were roads to drive on, and every one of those bears spends the fall putting on fat for the winter. The rules for a camp out there are simple, and every guide knows them. Meat hangs far from where people sleep, never close. Cooking happens away from the tents. Food goes in containers a bear cannot smell through, or it goes up a tree, or it goes behind an electric fence. Emmett had run his camps that way for 20 years and had never had so much as a bear in the tents. On this trip, the weather had been foul, the light had gone early, the men were tired and soaked through, and the buck had come in late. The pole went up 60 feet from the tents instead of a quarter mile out, because 60 feet was where the trees were and everybody was cold and it was only for one night. Every guide up there knows the rule about meat and tents. Theirs hung 60 feet off, because the weather was bad and it was one night. There is something else those bears learn, and it is the reason deer season on Kodiak is a different sort of dangerous. A rifle shot in that country means a dead animal on the ground, and a dead animal on the ground means a gut pile, and the bears there have heard enough rifle shots over enough seasons to have worked out the connection. Hunters on the island will tell you that a gut pile left in the evening is gone by morning, every time. So when Emmett shot that buck at last light, the sound of it carried out across the river flats and into the alders, and it told every bear within a couple of miles that there was fresh meat somewhere on the bench. Then the 4 of them carried the meat back to camp and hung it 60 feet from their beds. The boar came in around 2 in the morning. Nobody heard it arrive, because a bear that size moves through wet brush without making the sort of noise a person would wake up for. People expect something that big to crash about. They do not, and the rain on a tent fly covers what little there is. It went to the meat pole first and took the quarters down, and the sound of the pole coming apart was what woke Emmett. He came out of his tent with a headlamp and a rifle and put the beam on it, and what the light found was a Kodiak boar somewhere north of 1,000 pounds standing over the quarters with its head down. He fired 1 round into the air over its back, which is the thing you do, and which works on almost every bear almost every time it is tried. It did not work on this one. A bear standing over food it has already claimed does not run from noise. It looks up and it decides that the noisy thing in front of it is a competitor that wants the meat back. It came for Emmett across those 60 feet, and a brown bear covers 60 feet in about 2 seconds. He got no second shot. It hit him at the edge of the tents and put him down in the gravel and killed him there, and the noise of it woke the other 3 men out of a dead sleep into total darkness with no idea what was happening or where. What happened over the next few minutes happened in the dark, to men who were half in their sleeping bags in nylon tents that a bear opens like a paper sack. There were 2 more rifles in that camp, and both of them were in cases inside tents, where rifles live at 2 in the morning. Dale got his tent zipper open and got out and made it perhaps 20 feet, and he was the only one of the 3 who got clear of his tent at all. Curtis never did get out. The bear came through the wall of his tent on top of him, and the poles and the fabric came down over both of them, and there was no getting out of a collapsed tent with 1,000 pounds standing in it. Bo went the other way downhill, running for the river, and the skiff pulled up on the gravel there, and he was the one who very nearly made it, because he had a head start and a downhill slope and 130 feet to cover. Running is the worst thing a person can do in front of any bear, and it was also the only thing left to do, and both of those were true at the same time. A brown bear runs at around 30 miles an hour, which is quicker than any man who has ever lived, and it caught him at the waterline. By the time the sun came up, there was nothing moving in that camp at all. A bear that has claimed food does not spook off it. The shot over its head only told it that something was standing there wanting the meat. The air taxi came in on schedule 3 days later. on the 15th, and the pilot circled the bench twice before he set down. Help was on the ground within a few hours of his call, and the answer was never in any doubt from the moment the boar reached the tents. But every one of those men was found where he fell, and the meat pole was still lying where it had come apart. Authorities tracked and destroyed a boar in the alders a mile upriver. 2 days after that, an old male with worn teeth and the deer still in him. The families were told over the following week, 4 households in 4 different states, all of them hearing the same thing about the same night. There was no mystery in any of it and no argument about the cause. Only a hung deer 60 feet from 3 tents on an island with thousands of bears on it on a wet night when everybody was tired and the trees were where the trees were. The next man went looking for whatever the birds had found, which is one of the oldest ways there is to walk up on a bear that is already eating. The afternoon of September 4th, 2014 was clear and cold in the Yukon. In the north of Canada, moose season, with the willows along the creek bottoms turned yellow. Neil Farrow was working his way up a bench above a creek with his rifle slung alone when he saw the ravens. There were a dozen of them turning in a slow circle over the willows a few hundred yards ahead of him, dropping down out of sight and lifting again, making the racket ravens make when there is something below them worth making a racket about. You can see that from a mile off in open country, and every hunter alive knows what it means. He watched them for a minute and then started walking toward them. Neil was 38 and had hunted that country for years, and he read those birds precisely right, the way anybody who has spent time up there would. Ravens circling and dropping like that means something dead on the ground, and something dead on the ground in early September in the Yukon means a moose carcass, and a moose carcass usually means somebody has already claimed it. He knew all of that. He also knew that if a hunter had wounded a bull and lost it, the meat might still be salvageable, and there was a chance the animal was fresh. So he went in to look, and he went in quietly, because quiet is how you walk in country like that when you are hunting. The quiet is what killed him. Quiet is right for hunting and wrong for walking up on a carcass, and the two things ask for opposite behavior from a man. A grizzly on a kill does not leave it. It feeds until it is full, and then it buries what is left under dirt and moss and broken brush, and then it beds down within a stone's throw and sleeps on top of it. And it stays there for days doing that until the meat is gone. What Neil was walking into was a buried moose with a bear lying beside it, and he came in from downhill and downwind, moving quietly through head-high willows where nothing could see anything until it was 10 yards away. Ravens circling means something dead is below them. Something dead up there usually has a bear sleeping on it, and he walked in quietly. A grizzly guarding food is the most reliably dangerous animal in North America, and none of what it does is a bluff. There is no warning circle and no rearing up to have a look. A bear that has been asleep beside a buried kill and suddenly has a man at 10 yards has no time to think about it and does not try to. It goes from lying down to full contact in about 2 seconds, and over that distance, a person cannot lift a rifle, cannot turn, and cannot get to a can of spray on their hip. Whatever the man does in those 2 seconds is the only thing he is ever going to get to do. Neil came around a screen of willow, and the bear was there, up and moving before he had finished the step. What he walked into was the smell first. The one thing every hunter in that country is taught to stop for. A buried moose, 4 days old, in warm weather, and by the time a man registers that smell in thick willow, he is already inside the circle. He got the rifle half off his shoulder and got one hand on it. The grizzly hit him head on, took him down backward into the brush, and went for his head, which is what they do when they are killing something to make it stop rather than to eat it, and the whole of it was over in well under a minute. Then it did the thing that tells you plainly what was in its mind. It dragged him about 40 feet and it buried him, breaking dirt and moss and broken willow over him with its front paws until he was covered, the same way it had covered the moose, and then it went back and lay down between the two of them. It never tried to eat him. He turned up 10 yards from a kill it was sleeping on, and it dealt with him like a problem. Neil had told people the drainage he was working and was expected back that night, and when he was not, a search started the next morning and found his truck at the pullout and his tracks going up the bench. They found the ravens too, still turning over the same patch of willow 2 days on, and the ravens were the thing that ended the search. The bear was still there. It took most of a day to work out how to get in safely, and the animal was destroyed in the willows within sight of what it had been guarding. What the searchers found underneath told the story without anybody having to guess at it. A covered moose, a covered man, and a bed dug in the moss between them. Neil's family was told the following evening. He had done nothing that afternoon except read the birds correctly and walk in to see, and the reading was right and the walking in was what got him. The next one had a walk of about 2 minutes to make in a settlement of a few hundred people on a night when the ice had not come in yet. The evening of November 19th, 2013 was dark by mid-afternoon in a small settlement on the coast of Greenland, the way it is up there in November, with the sea still open and black offshore. Avi Aja Kleist left a house on the upper row and started walking home, which meant crossing perhaps 200 yards of packed snow between the buildings, past the fuel drums, and the drying racks, on a route she had walked several thousand times in her own life, and could have walked with her eyes shut. She was 31 years old. There was a polar bear standing between the buildings, and she did not see it, and it had been watching the settlement for some time before she ever opened that door. The bears come ashore in the fall when the sea ice goes, and they wait. They cannot hunt seals without ice, so from the melt until the freeze they are on land, burning through their reserves and getting hungrier every week. And by November, a bear that has been waiting since summer is as hungry as it is ever going to get. Every settlement up there knows this, and has known it for as long as there have been settlements. People carry rifles between houses in bear season. There are watches, and there are lights, and children do not walk alone after dark, and the whole rhythm of the place changes for those weeks. That November, the ice was late, which meant the bears had been ashore and empty for longer than usual, and one of them had come down into town. Aviaja knew every bit of that, the way a person knows the weather where they grew up, but it was a 2-minute walk on a route she had walked her entire life, from one lit house to another lit house, and she went out the door without a rifle and without anybody with her, because it was 2 minutes. She grew up with those bears and knew every rule. It was 2 minutes between 2 lit houses, so she went out alone. A polar bear does not behave like the other bears in this video, and this is the thing that makes it so dangerous to be near. The bears that kill people in Alaska and Canada and Romania are almost always defending something, a kill or a cub or their own space, and they attack because a person got too close. A polar bear that comes into a town in November has come there to find food, and a person walking alone in the dark is food. There is no bluff and no warning and no noise. It watches, it works out the angle, and it comes, and it is astonishingly quiet for an animal the size of a small car. A polar bear is a patient animal. It will lie flat behind a snowbank for an hour watching a seal hole, and it will do the same thing behind a fuel drum watching a door, and the same patience that works on seals works on a settlement. This one had been in among the buildings for some time, moving when nothing was moving. It had picked its ground. It took her between the fuel drums and the last row of houses, and it came from the side, out of the dark where there were no lights, and she never turned around. It killed her with one blow and a bite, and it began dragging her away from the buildings almost immediately, the way a hungry bear does with something it means to eat. The noise she made brought people out of 2 houses within about a minute, and men came out with rifles and lights inside of 2 more, and the bear was shot near the edge of the settlement, not far from where it had taken her. All of that happened fast, faster than it would happen almost anywhere else on Earth, because everyone up there is ready for this. It was still far too late, and it had been far too late from the moment it moved. Most of the bears in this video were defending something. That one came into a town starving in November, and she was walking alone in the dark. The bear was a young male, thin, with almost nothing in its stomach, which surprised nobody at all. A fat bear in November is a bear that got out onto the ice. A thin one in among the houses is a bear that did not. Aviaja's family lived in the settlement, and most of them were there within the hour, and that carries its own weight. The authorities recorded it the way these are recorded up there: a hungry bear ashore in a late ice year, and there was no fault to find in anybody, only a woman who took a 2-minute walk in her own town. The settlement went back to its bear watches the next night. Everyone in that place had already known what happens when the ice comes late, and none of that knowledge was worth anything on the 200 yards between one lit door and the next. The next man came around a thorn bush at dusk on a path he had walked all his life, and met an animal that never heard him coming at all. The evening of May 26, 2021 was hot and going dim in the dry scrub of central India, the hour when the light drops fast and the forest gets busy. Prakash Kale was walking home along a footpath through thorn scrub and boulders, a path his village had used for generations, carrying nothing and thinking about nothing in particular. He was 44 years old. Somewhere ahead of him, off the path in the scrub, a sloth bear was digging into a termite mound with a cub riding on her back, and she had no idea he was there. Everyone outside India pictures the tiger. Inside India, in the villages that sit up against the scrub, the animal people actually worry about is the sloth bear, and it injures and kills more people there than the tigers do. It is a strange-looking animal, shaggy and loose-skinned, with a long, pale muzzle, and it lives on termites and ants, which it hoovers out of mounds with a noise you can hear from a fair distance. It has no interest in hunting anything bigger than an insect. It has poor eyesight, it has poor hearing, it spends its evenings with its face jammed into a termite mound, snorting and blowing, which does nothing at all to help either one. Put those things together, and you get an animal that regularly does not know a person is nearby until that person is standing on top of it. And a sloth bear that gets a surprise at close range does not run, and does not rear up and consider it, and does not have any middle setting. It goes forward. Female with a cub on her back, and it goes forward harder. Nobody outside India worries about the sloth bear. Inside India, it hurts and kills more people than the tigers do, and this is why. Prakash came around a thorn bush and she was 8 feet away, and neither one of them had any warning at all. 8 feet is nothing. It is closer than the far side of a small room, and it is well inside the distance at which a sloth bear has any option left except to go forward. She came up onto her hind legs and went straight at his face. Sloth bears have front claws 3 or 4 inches long, curved and blunt, built for tearing open concrete, hard termite mounds, and what they do to a face is beyond anything a person imagines when they hear the word bear. She was on him before he could get his arms up. She took his scalp and the side of his head, and she stayed on him, and the cub came off her back and stood in the scrub while it happened, and she went on well past the point where he had stopped moving, because a frightened sloth bear does not check its work. Then she gathered the cub and went, and left him on the path. She never tried to eat any part of him, and never would have. The whole thing had taken under a minute, and had nothing behind it but her surprise. She had a cub on her back, and a man came around a thorn bush 8 feet away. That's the entire reason he died. He was found on the path within the hour by people from his own village who came looking when he did not arrive, and they carried him out on a cot and got him toward a road. He did not survive his injuries. The nearest place that could have done anything for a head wound like that was a long way from the end of that path, and the hours it would have taken were hours he did not have. Attacks like this are common enough in that district that the forest staff who came out did not need much explaining, and they did not hunt for the bear because there is no useful way to identify one sloth bear out of the scrub afterward, and no purpose in it when a startled animal with a cub has done what startled animals with cubs do. What the village asked for afterward was what villages there always ask for: some way of not walking those paths alone at dusk, and that is not much of an ask when the path is the only way home. The next one lived beside those bears every summer and had grown comfortable with something that nobody should ever be comfortable around. The morning of August 8th, 2015 was gray and cool on the coast of Kamchatka in the far east of Russia in the middle of the salmon run. Yelena Bazanova walked out of a cabin at a small fish camp a little after first light and went down toward the smoking racks 40 yards off to check the split fish hanging there. She was 35 and had worked summers on that coast for years and knew more about those bears than most people ever will. There was a brown bear at the racks. There had been a brown bear at or near those racks most mornings that season, which was the actual problem, and had been the problem for a long while before anybody died of it. Kamchatka is one of the great bear places on Earth. Thousands of brown bears on a peninsula with hardly any people, all of them living off the salmon that come up those rivers every summer. A fish camp is a building full of salmon standing in the middle of that, and to a bear, it reads as a very reliable stretch of river that happens to have people standing on it. Bears learn a fish camp the way they learn a river, and once one has fed there without anything bad happening to it, it comes back, and it brings the same expectation every time. A bear does not distinguish between food it was given and food it took. The camp had a garbage pit that was not burned out anywhere near often enough. Split fish hung in the open air, on racks down by the water, in the wind, where the smell of them carried. Bears came through at dawn and dusk, and got run off with shouting and pots and the occasional shot into the air, and they always came back, and each time they left a little slower than the time before. That is what habituation actually looks like, and it is not dramatic while it is happening. It looks like a bear that will not leave, and people who have stopped finding that strange, by August, that particular bear had learned that the shouting meant nothing, and Yelena had learned, without ever deciding to, that walking down to the racks with a bear standing at them was a normal part of the morning. That bear had stood at those racks most mornings all season. Everybody there had stopped finding it even strange. A big Kamchatka brown bear runs to around 1,000 pounds in a good salmon year, and it is the same animal as a grizzly, only fatter and more confident, because nothing on that coast has ever given it a reason not to be. A bear at a food source it considers its own does not think of an approaching person as a threat. It thinks of them as something else that wants the fish. When it decides to settle that, it settles it in under 3 seconds from 30 yards, and there is nothing between the racks and the cabin door except open gravel. She came down the slope and clapped her hands at it and shouted the way it had gone 100 times before, and this time it came. There was no build to it and no warning bluff, because the bear had run out of reasons to bluff years earlier. It simply stopped being a bear at the racks and became a bear coming up the gravel. It covered the ground between the racks and the slope faster than she could turn around. It knocked her flat and bit down through her shoulder and neck and shook her, and then it stood over her, and that was what the 2 men out of the cabin had to watch while they were still working out what they were seeing. They fired and hit it, and it went into the brush and died there, and by then the thing had been finished for a while. She was gone before either of them reached her. Nothing had ever taught that bear to fear a person shouting. Every summer taught it the opposite, one morning at a time. the camp radioed out, and a helicopter came the same day, which was the fastest anything could have come on that coast, and made no difference to the outcome. Nothing arriving from anywhere would have. Yelena's family learned of it in the city 2 days later. The findings afterwards said what everyone on that coast already knew and had known for years, that the fish were hanging in the open, that the garbage pit was not being burned, and that a bear had been fed by that camp without anybody ever intending to feed it. The camp burned its pit properly the next season and put an electric fence around the racks, which should have been there all along and would have cost less than the helicopter did. The next man went up the mountain before dawn to pick bamboo shoots into a stand of bamboo where a bear had already learned something it should never have been able to learn. The morning of June 2nd, 2016 was misty and cool in the mountains of northern Honshu in Japan. In the short weeks when the bamboo shoots come up and the hillsides fill with people cutting them, Toshiro Nakai left his house before first light and drove to a logging track and walked up into a bamboo stand he had been picking for 40 years. He was 72 years old. He went alone before light, the way he had gone every spring of his adult life. There was an Asiatic black bear on that mountain that had already killed people that spring, and everybody in the valley knew it. The shoots are worth real money for a few weeks, and the people who pick them are mostly old, because it is the old people who still know where the good stands are. The stands themselves are the problem. Bamboo grows so dense that a person is pushing through it with their hands, and you cannot see 10 feet, and you cannot hear much over the noise you are making, and neither can anything else. Every spring, the pickers and the bears end up in the same thickets for the same few weeks, and every spring, somebody gets hurt. An Asiatic black bear is a smaller animal than any of the others in this video, 250 pounds or so, black with a pale crescent on its chest, and none of that smallness helps a person at close range. It is bad-tempered, and it goes for the face and the head, and it will not back off the way a black bear in North America usually will. What made this one different was that it had already killed and fed on people that spring, 4 of them in that same area over about 2 weeks, and once a bear has done that, it does not unlearn it. That is why the valley knew about it. That is why the warnings were out and the police cars were parked at the trailheads. Toshiro drove past all of that in the dark and parked at a track further along and went up. The bear had already killed 4 people in 2 weeks and had fed on them. He drove past the warnings before dawn and went up anyway. He got into the stand at first light, in the mist, and started cutting. What a picker looks like in there is a bent-over shape, moving slowly and steadily through thick cover, making a rustling noise at ground level close to the ground for hours. There is not much difference between that shape and any other animal moving through bamboo, and to a bear that has already worked out that these particular shapes can be killed and eaten, there is no difference at all. It came from behind him, and it came very close, because in that bamboo, there is nowhere further away than close. A picker works with his back bent and his hands busy and his eyes down at the base of the stems, and he is making noise and the bamboo is making noise, and a bear moving in that is a rumor until it is contact. He had a small curved knife for cutting shoots, and there is evidence he got a hand on it and turned toward it. The bear went for his head and his face, took him off his feet, and dragged him about 60 feet off the picking line into thicker cover, and there was nobody within half a mile of him to hear any of it. He was found late that afternoon when his truck was still sitting at the track at dusk, and men went up with lights, moving in a line, none of them keen to be in that bamboo, and all of them going in anyway. In that bamboo, you can't see 10 feet. A bent-over man cutting shoots looks like prey, and that bear had already learned that. The animal was hunted for the better part of a week by men who knew the mountain, and one was shot in the same drainage, and the killing stopped after that. Toshiro's family had known where he was going and had asked him not to, and the news reached them by the middle of the evening. It is a hard thing to explain to people who did not grow up there. The shoots come up for a few weeks, the money is real, the stands are the ones your father showed you, and a man who has walked up that mountain every spring for 40 years does not stop going because the radio says there is a bear. 4 people had already died on that hillside that spring, and each one of them had heard the same warnings. The last one was moving too fast and too quietly to give an animal any warning on a mountain where the bears had been taught for years that people mean food. The afternoon of July 23rd, 2022 was warm and green in the mountains of northern Slovakia, on a forest track below a walker's hut. Joseph Varga was coming down that track on a mountain bike, moving well, the way you do on a fire road when the surface is good and the gradient is doing the work for you. He was 36 and had ridden that track most weekends of the summer. The track ran through a stretch of forest where a brown bear was working the edge of the trees a few yards off the corner, and Joseph came around that corner at close to 20 miles an hour without a sound. Slovakia has around 1,000 brown bears in the Carpathians, and the one ones near the huts and the car parks behave nothing like the ones deep in the forest. They have been finding food around people for years, out of bins that do not close and off scraps left at picnic tables and out of the backs of vans, and a bear that has done that stops treating the smell of people as a reason to leave. The country had been arguing about those bears for years by then. The bears near the tracks were bolder every season, and there had been maulings, and there was a fair amount of shouting about whose fault it was, and none of that changed the animal standing at the edge of the trees that afternoon. A bicycle is the quietest, fast thing in the woods. A walker makes noise for an hour before they arrive, and a bear moves off long before it ever sees them, which is why walkers almost never have this problem. A bike does none of that. It closes half a mile of forest in 90 seconds, silently, and it arrives at 20 miles an hour. And the first thing the bear knows about it is a shape coming around a bend at speed within 20 feet. From the bear's side of it, that is an ambush, and the bear did what any bear does when something bursts out of the trees at it from that distance. A walker makes noise for an hour, and the bear is gone before you arrive. A bike shows up silently at 20 miles an hour. It hit him off the bike. There was no braking and nothing to brake for because at 20 miles an hour, the corner and the bear and the contact are the same event. He went down hard on the gravel with the bike tangled in his legs, and a brown bear of maybe 500 pounds was on him before he had stopped sliding. It bit his leg and his arm and then his head and shoulder, and it stayed with it, and it was not a swat and a run the way these often are. He was found within the half hour by two walkers coming down the same track. The bear was gone by then. He did not survive the injuries, and the help that came for him came reasonably fast and could not have changed it. He did nothing wrong that afternoon. He rode a bike down a track, and years of people feeding the bears was waiting around the corner. The bear was never identified, which is normal, because tracking one particular animal out of a forest full of them after the fact is mostly guesswork. Joseph's family learned of it that evening. The argument in the country got louder for a few weeks afterward, and then went quiet again, the way that argument always does. The bins by the huts stayed the way they were for a while longer, and the bears kept working them, and the next rider came down the same track the next weekend. He is the only one in this video who did not do a single thing that a careful person would call a mistake, unless riding a bicycle down a forest road counts as one. 7 people and 7 bears. One was hunting, some were sitting on food, one had a cub, and the rest were just there first.